For anyone playing Dark Souls 3, it can become pretty easy to recognize the theme of light and dark is more prominent in this new addition to the series than any other. The visual design of the game puts this idea forth right from the get-go. For example, Iodux's body is possessed by pure, sentient dark that holds the coiled sword. The coiled sword is the key to lighting the bonfire, and fire is easily interpreted as the source of light, but that is somewhat potentially incorrect given the nature of dark in this world. In the Cathedral of the Deep, clean and pristine water is juxtaposed directly next to vile sludge. This is also reflected in the new status screen. The status screen represents our character's body, mind, and soul, so it is as important to look at as any item description or design piece on the map. Kindling yourself has replaced consuming humanity in order to gain bonus health on the end of our weakened state, somewhat giving credence to the idea Vati Vidya expressed that the Dark Soul may in fact just be the leftover cinders of the first flame. We use a small ember to just barely light our own soul to gain extra strength, rather than burning it away as Gwyn and the previous Lords of Cinder did with the first flame. And we are once again prophesied to fulfill the great good of retrieving the hallowed Lords of Cinder, to return them to their duty, and once again light the fire. Kindling our soul represents the light that comes from humanity. Hollowing also affects the unkindled ash differently. In Dark Souls 3, hollowing is a power that grows with each death. However, the hollowing number only goes up to 99. The hollowing stat is a percent, and as a player character, you can only be 99% hollowed. Were we allowed to be completely hollowed, we would be devoid of purpose or intention, unable to make use of our humanity, sovereignless vessels akin to our targets. And in true Dark Souls fashion, we only reach full hollowing when we abandon the game. Perhaps this is why we are suddenly called the Lord of the Hollows, because we so boldly walk that line while never crossing over, which seems to be the goal of these cultist pilgrims of Londor. Remember, there is no death in this world for humans, only hollowing. The Londor pilgrims who bore large covers on their backs to ensure that they would not become seedbeds for the growing darkness are not truly dead, but fully hollowed, and their bodies pinned to the ground by the boulders they wear on their backs. They are unable to move from the crippling sustained by their pilgrimage. Perhaps Yol was not able to die on his pilgrimage because he intended more for humanity than its containment beneath a stone. Hollowing represents the growing darkness inside us. But unkindled ash is special. No matter how many deaths they sustain, they cannot lose their share in humanity. The dark sigil is a gaping hole in the flesh that resembles the brand of an undead. The darkness of humanity seeps from this bottomless, pitch-black hole. But unkindled ash will not relinquish it all. They will always have that spark of dark inside them, and with embers they may kindle their souls with the power of fire and light. Remember, the status screen represents who and what the player character is. So what does this represent? I believe that seeing this simultaneously present theme of light and dark, even so far as on our own character's inner self, is the key to understanding the philosophy and the message of Dark Souls 3. And the sign to this message is known as the Lucifer Effect. The Lucifer Effect is a book that documents the 1971 Stanford prison experiment. In this experiment, 24 volunteers were chosen and evaluated on their psychological health and stability, and randomly split between the roles of prisoner and prison guard. The guards were given uniforms, reflector sunglasses, and wooden clubs to signify their status. The prisoners were given ill-fitting rags to wear, a chained shackle for their legs, and a number to replace their name. The guards were instructed to not inflict any physical harm on the prisoners. The prisoners were instructed to follow the guards' directions, and told they could leave the experiment at any time. This was to be a 14-day experiment to test the hypothesis that cruelty and inhumane behavior was the result of personality traits that were inherent to individuals. But what they found was drastically different. On day 2 of the experiment, 3 prisoners blockaded themselves in their cell and started making demands for better conditions. The guards responded by taking their mattresses as punishment. Over the next 4 days, guards began to subject their prisoners to progressively worse measures to keep them under control. Prisoners had to repeatedly recite and refer to themselves by their number, berate fellow prisoners who resisted instruction. One prisoner asked to leave. When he was replaced, the new prisoner resisted what they saw as cruel treatment. He was locked into a closet as solitary confinement, while the other prisoners were made to bash the door while yelling the new prisoner's number. Prisoners were stripped of their clothes, forced to go to the restroom in a bucket, forced to not be able to relieve themselves, and progressively worse psychological torture. As the guards took greater and greater measures, the prisoners even resorted to negotiating with the professor who was running the experiment to give up their compensation for participating in the experiment in order to be let on parole, even though they were allowed to quit the experiment at any time. Both groups had completely internalized their roles. The prisoners abandoned the notion that they were free individuals, and the guards had completely dehumanized their view of the prisoners. These largely kind and upstanding students had completely degraded into evil. And by evil I mean the lowercase e, evil, the distinction commonly drawn between evil as some supernatural force that controls mankind, and evil, which is the cruelty that originates and is natural in humans. Good people turned bad by their assigned roles in a particularly dark environment. What is most surprising is that this experiment didn't just affect the students in it. Professor Philip Zimbardo, who ran the experiment as the prison's superintendent, despite having no direct control or interaction over the guards and the prisoners, became an accessory to the cruel treatment. At one point, he even completely relocated the set for the mock prison to a different building in response to a prisoner's rumor that the student who chose to leave the experiment was rallying a group of students to come and put a stop to it. Zimbardo then sat in the basement of the original site, waiting for that student with the intent of lying to him about the experiment being cancelled. That student never came. It was only a rumor. It wasn't until grad student Christina Maslach had the opportunity to observe the experiment did she convince him of the unethical treatment going on and get the experiment halted. She was the only person of 50 observers of the experiment to raise a question about ethics. What this experiment shows, and what Dark Souls aims to teach, is that evil is something that can be taught. Cruelty and dehumanization isn't just a matter of good or bad people, but can be instilled in humanity rather quickly through our environment and assigned roles. This is known as Arendt's concept of radical evil. This is the kind of evil that sees humanity as superfluous to the human being. It takes human beings and makes them into living corpses, devoid of spontaneity and freedom. From there, it is easy to tacitly dehumanize the people around you. There is much evidence for the pull of cruelty throughout the choices we make in Dark Souls 3. We first gain the power of hollowing upon receiving the service of Yol of Londor. He silently places the dark sigil upon us, and uses our deaths to strengthen it. Upon harvesting enough of this power in us, Yol falls, and Yuria of Londor comes in his stead. Yol gave us power, and Yuria gives us authority. We are named the Lord of Hollows, and with that, Yuria gives us the responsibility and the expectations of a lord. She then warns us against Orbeck of Vinheim, tells us to dispose of him. Orbeck is a sorcerer. His only interest is in expanding his knowledge, and to have him in your service, all you must do is provide tomes of sorcery. Orbeck, then somehow sensing our contemplation, reminds us of the weight behind each and every death we cause. Certainly a strange bit of wisdom in a world where death is mostly meaningless, as most men have become undead or hollows. So, do you fulfill your duty as Lord of Hollows, or do you leave Orbeck to his devices, not knowing the motives behind his studies? The thief, Grey Rat of the undead settlement, made it seem like you were doing a good deed by returning a ring, but upon discovering Loretta's death, the thief gives us a thought that delivering the ring might have been insidious. Grey Rat seems in one part saddened and another part relieved to hear that Loretta has died. Perhaps delivering the ring too would have spelled Loretta's death. And then we must decide whether to let him go out to steal, to scratch the itch, or tell him not to engage in thieving and face the consequences should he lash out. You are the power, the authority, the prison guard. Your decisions as unkindled ash have responsibility. Finally, the most forgettable of choices. Do we kill the non-aggressive enemies on the high wall of Lothric, who only attack if you attack them? They don't appear to be fully hollowed. They simply cling to their prayers and pleadings as their purpose. Part of reaching your goal is to defeat hollows. But are you, with the pull of your own purpose and the responsibility of your authority, as unkindled ash or as Lord of Hollows, able to maintain the distinctions between the fully hollowed and the mostly hollow? Can you keep the order of your law while understanding the limits of law's domain and where the exceptions come to play? Our player character, the unkindled ash, comes into the world ignorant, confused, and largely well-meaning, and with our good intentions, we go out to encounter many who seem just as well-meaning. Some seek aid and pity. Others wish to exchange ideas, confident they can solve any problem themselves. Some are comrades with similar goals and wish you well on yours. Some only offer help if you can contribute to theirs. And some seek a leader to give them meaning, having lost their own long ago. In this way, life for an undead in Dark Souls isn't too dissimilar from our own. No matter how well-intentioned, it is possible that we are led astray by authority, whether someone else's or our own, by duty, by good and bad intentions. We all pursue the good, but we may at any moment be taught to be evil. Thus we must adopt a new duty, to be constantly mindful, to safeguard against cruelty.